What if Obi Wan joined Anakin? Let's start this story on Mustafar. Obi Wan walks down the Naboo royal starship as Padme falls to the floor unconscious. He yells at Anakin, telling him to look at what he's done, look at what the Emperor has made him do, hurt someone he loves. Anakin takes a moment looking at Padme, realizing that yes, he let his anger take over him momentarily, but Palpatine has given him something: power. Anakin tells this to Obi Wan, that the dark side has freed him from his past restraints, that now he can do anything, even defeat Palpatine. Obi Wan tells Anakin that his ambition ends here, but Anakin begs Obi Wan to think that together they can combine their strength to stop Palpatine before he takes control of the Empire, that together they can rule in his place. Anakin tells Kenobi to think of the galaxy they can create together, if they have the power to do so. All the good they can do, eliminate crime, reduce poverty, and make the galaxy a better place. The Republic, Palpatine's empire. Nothing changes, but together in power they can do this. Obviously the Obi-Wan we know wouldn't be tempted by this, but in this story, Kenobi starts to think that Anakin has a point. He asks Anakin what they must do, and Skywalker tells his master they must defeat Palpatine, take control of the empire and rule for themselves. Kenobi agrees and they scoop up Padme and head back to Coruscant. They come out of hyperspace and aim straight for the Senate building. They can sense the Force exploding from the building, which must mean that Palpatine and Yoda are fighting. They break through the ceiling and land on the lower levels. They watch as Yoda falls, barely holding on to the Senate console. Anakin pounces, rushes over to Yoda, igniting his blade and thrusting it through his chest. Obi-Wan calls for Anakin to wait, that maybe Yoda can help them, but it's no use. Anakin and Obi-Wan jump and land next to Palpatine, who congratulates Anakin that he arrived at the perfect time, and now with the Grand Master of the Jedi Order defeated, they are successful. But before Palpatine could continue, Anakin and Obi-Wan act in a flash. They catch the already fatigued Palpatine off guard, ignite their sabers, and thrust it through the Emperor's chest, ending his life. The Coruscant Guard rush in and point their guns at Anakin and Obi-Wan, but Skywalker told them that because they defeated the Emperor, they are now in charge and therefore command them. After the Senate chamber was cleaned up, hours later they hosted a Senate meeting. The Senate podium rose as the senators were prepared to see the new Emperor Palpatine emerge, but shock encompasses everyone, as instead of Palpatine, Jedi Masters Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi were there. They waited until the silence died down and Anakin took the microphone. He told them all that from this day forth, himself and Kenobi would be the new emperors of the galaxy. They defeated Palpatine as they believed he did not have the galaxy's best interests in mind. Kenobi spoke next, telling everyone they will ensure galactic order to create prosperity for every system, and any worlds that do not comply will be visited swiftly by the clone army. Silence encompasses the chamber as Anakin and Obi-Wan leave, having successfully established their control over the Empire. Next they went to the hospital where Padme had just entered labor. Anakin crouched down beside her, stroking her cheek with his hand, telling her it'll all be okay, that they're together now and he'll save her. Obi-Wan joined them as the moment was upon them, whether Padme would survive childbirth. And she did. First arrived Luke, followed closely by Leia. Anakin was extremely happy. He finally had everything he ever wanted. Over the following weeks, they established the initial stages of their empire. Padme was shocked when she watched the recording of Obi-Wan and Anakin in the Senate and confronted them about this. But they sat her down and explained everything. That they're not using their dominance and empire for power and selfishness, but to bring order and control to the galaxy. To use the galaxy to make the empire a greater place. Initially, Padme had issues with this. She loved democracy and believed in it through and through, but she had to admit, the Republic had 1,000 years of democracy and nothing had changed. Corruption had taken over the Senate and citizens of the galaxy suffered. As she saw the positive changes implemented, Padme was convinced the Empire could be a good thing and joined them as Empress. Obi-Wan and Padme were the diplomats, instigating political change and coming up with reform policies, whilst Anakin was the enforcer of control, leading the clone army to ensure systems complied with their empire. They instantly took monetary control, using the clones to take over every coaxium and hyperspace fuel and energy plants. They monetized this as well as increasing taxes on every system to gain the financial power for their empire. Through this, they started building farming worlds, water purifier plants all around the galaxy, as well as setting up an Imperial Construction Guild, where they paid for people to be trained in building infrastructure, as well as employing existing ones and set up projects on more disenfranchised worlds to ensure everyone in the galaxy had the 3 basic standards of living: food and water, shelter, and warmth. This took a few years to get going, but after 10 years of the Empire, they had completely changed thousands of planetary systems. Meanwhile, with the Jedi Order's destruction, Obi Wan and Anakin had full exposure to the Jedi archives and together started using the Sith holocrons to learn about the dark side. They studied it together, practicing the techniques they used, and ultimately, they both increased their power. However, Anakin's potential was unlimited. His power soared in these 10 years, mastering Sith techniques, such as Deadly Sight to completely incinerate any enemy merely by looking at them, Red Inferno Sith Lightning, as well as learning to fly for short periods of time. He really was birthed by the Force, but the technique that mattered the most was his ability to peer into the future. He focused on this a lot and over time learned to use it at will, seeing glimpses of the future when he was in deep meditation. He used this to find and hunt down surviving Jedi, crush the initial rebellion led by Bail Organa, and ensure peace in his empire. However, they also started a new Force order called the Imperial Knights, where they trained a limited number of Force users in the light and dark sides of the Force to carry out their bidding. One of these recruits was a former human Corellian Jedi that Obi Wan fell in love with, married, and started a family together. 10 more years passed of their empire, which encompassed their first major war. Anakin saw in the future that unrest quelled in the unknown regions between the Chiss and the Grisk, an area he wanted under Imperial control. He led the Imperial forces and swiftly crushed the Grisk forces into oblivion. However, the war with the Chiss was more drawn out. It was also the first major test for Luke and Leia, both masters of the Force who led their own squadrons during this time. However, the Chiss were forced to surrender as Anakin overcame Admiral Thrawn's planetary defense fleet on Chila and successfully occupied the Chiss homeworld. And the Skywalker Kenobi Empire had complete control of the unknown regions. During these 20 years, Anakin and Padme had 2 more children, Qui-Gon and Shmi. Anakin trained his children in the Force himself, who all had similar potential to him. They were the strongest Force users the galaxy had ever seen. Obi-Wan also had 3 children, Brett, Kayla, and Sherian, who became top generals of the Imperial Knights. But most importantly, Anakin and Obi-Wan's families stayed very close, and their children got on together amazingly. They would often catch up and spend evenings together, full of laughs and games, reminiscing on the past and their plans for the future. It could not be argued that the Empire wasn't a good thing for the galaxy. Poverty had vanished, corruption and greed were gone, and everyone had the basic necessities of life. However, after 25 years of the Empire, something started to change. Anakin felt it first during deep meditation. Something was different about the Force. The dark side started to pull away from them subtly, and no longer served them like it used to. Anakin didn't think much of this initially, until the Force blocked his ability to peer into the future. This bothered him a lot, especially when the first surprise attacks came. Star Destroyers exited hyperspace to completely decimate the Imperial defenses around Sojourn, Baramora, Delphi, Gelder, Vexter, and the Zintal systems. Anakin was on Coruscant when the reports came in, and he contacted Obi-Wan instantly. Something felt off about this. It wasn't a simple attack. He soared down, reaching out with the Force, attempting to peer across the galaxy until the call came in. A hologram appeared in front of him in his throne room. A tall, slender alien, a moon, with deep yellow and red eyes, stared at him intensely. Anakin demands to reveal himself, and the alien tells Anakin that his attack is a declaration of war, that he will pay for what he did to the Sith and his apprentice, Darth Sidious. Anakin's eyes went wide. If this alien is the master of Palpatine, that must mean he's Darth Plagueis. The hologram disappeared as Anakin was left to meditate in his thoughts. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Plagueis had his forces and had successfully taken back a chunk of his old territory. Plagueis thinks back around 35 years ago when Palpatine struck him down. On the brink of death after Palpatine had killed him and disposed of his body, the midichlorians inside him came back to life. However, only barely enough to keep his survival hidden from Palpatine. He remained in a vegetating state for years, building up the strength and regrowing his connection to the midichlorians. And when he was strong enough to escape, he stole a ship and ventured into the unknown regions. He knew there was nothing left for him in the known galaxy, and had heard stories of ancient Sith living in wild space. After months of searching, he found them, the lost tribe of the Sith, remnants of the Naga Sadow line. They resided on Kesh. Plagueis landed his ship and quickly took control over the Sith, defeating their current ruler with ease, and together they spent the next few decades strengthening their forces, building up their military might and preparing for war. Plagueis knew the Force had given him a second chance to take over the galaxy, and he would take it. War breaks out across the galaxy between Plagueis' Sith and the Skywalker Kenobi Empire. It spanned across countless star systems, fought in massive space engagements that lit the galaxy like wildfire. Fleets of Imperial Star Destroyers clashed against the jagged warships of Plagueis' Sith Armada. Whole sectors turned into graveyards, and many worlds joined Plagueis willingly, as defiance towards Anakin and Obi Wan. Amid these battles, the Imperial Knights faced off against the Sith warriors. These duels were brutal, and were the true test of the Empire. To further tip the scales, Plagueis unleashed ancient Sith spawn and monstrous war beasts, forged from forbidden alchemy, then rampaged across battlefields and required entire teams of knights to bring down. Plagueis commanded his forces from Sojourn, whilst Anakin was on Coruscant. Plagueis knew Anakin would get involved in the war personally at some point, which likely would tip the scales in his favour. He understood that Skywalker's power was not normal and there was a strong necessity to overcome it, and knew he couldn't do it himself. Plagueis waited until the time was right to get involved. Luke and Leia were sent into battle to lead the attack to conquer the Barramora system. Plagueis went into battle himself, knowing he couldn't defeat the two in combat, but instead had another plan. He purposefully threw the battle, made tactical decisions that caused the Imperial forces to defeat his own. His personal Star Destroyer was captured, and Luke and Leia strode onto it triumphant that they'd just captured the leader of the opposition and ended the war. They drew their lightsabers as they demanded Plagueis' surrender. But instead of looking up in fear, he smiled at the Skywalkers and started chanting in an ancient Sith language. Either side of Luke and Leia, Sith alchemists came out of hiding and did the same. Luke and Leia were frozen in place and forced to their knees. They clawed at their heads as they fell. Plagueis attempting to gain control, they tried to fight it, using every ounce of Force teaching they had, but it wasn't enough. Plagueis completed the ritual and had successfully taken over the minds of Luke and Leia. The second and third strongest Force users in the galaxy were now under his control. He uses Luke to command his forces to retreat and takes the Skywalker twins back to his territory. After the battle, Plagueis calls Anakin and taunts him with Luke and Leia either side of him. Anakin destroyed his throne room in rage. How could he let that happen? Why did the Force not show him the possibility of this in the future? He contacted the Kenobi family and his own to hold a meeting. He told them all what happened as Padme and his children burst into tears. Kayla, girlfriend of Luke, broke down as well, determined to save her partner. Padme asked what they should do, and Obi Wan turned to Anakin, telling him their military is larger than Plagueis'. They should launch an all-out assault to get the twins back. Anakin thought about it and agreed. He told everyone they would have a role. Each of Obi Wan and his children would command their own section of the overall fleet, whilst Obi Wan and Anakin were on the command ship. They spent the rest of the day planning and the following day gathering their forces as they launched the entire armada, 250 Star Destroyers straight for the head of Plagueis' forces. First they recaptured Delphi, Gelder, Vexter and then Zental, until they entered hyperspace one last time to exit around the Sojourn system. Plagueis had the majority of his fleet here, and he had almost most of them back after he had heard of the Empire had come for him in full force. He knew Anakin was coming for him to take back Luke and Leia. However, he had a plan for when he arrived. The battle broke out, the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen. But Anakin and Obi Wan didn't care what had happened to their ships. The clones were nothing but soldiers. What mattered was Luke and Leia. Anakin and Obi-Wan board their own fighter, piloted by Anakin, the greatest pilot the galaxy had ever seen. He soared through the battlefield, dodging blaster fire and targeted missiles until he landed on Plagueis' command ship. They made their way through the ship, defeating Sith warriors and crew until they cut through the bridge door to see Luke and Leia on the other side of Plagueis, smirking. Anakin and Obi-Wan rushed forward as Plagueis commanded Luke and Leia to fight, who ignited their blades and engaged Anakin and Obi-Wan in combat. They tried to reason with Luke and Leia, but could see their eyes that it wasn't really them in there, and knew how to save them was to defeat Plagueis. Anakin turns to Obi-Wan and nods. They had a plan for this. Anakin used his speed to rush past Luke and Leia and went straight for Plagueis. Meanwhile, Luke and Leia focused on Obi-Wan. However, Kenobi knew their attack strategies. He had trained with them 1,000 times, and Obi-Wan, the master of Form 3, focused entirely on defense and could keep them at bay, at least for now. Anakin thrusted his lightsaber at Plagueis, who ignited his and blocked. Together, both of them at the same time casted Force Lightning at each other, but Anakin's overpowered Plagueis, and he was sent flying back. But he recouped himself and opened a hatch to the other side as Sith beasts came flying at Anakin, who dashed and sliced at the beasts, cutting them down one by one. When he finished, Plagueis was on him, putting Anakin on the back foot, but he quickly turned this, slicing Plagueis' lightsaber in half and sending him flying back with the Force. Plagueis' vision went blurry for a moment, but both he and Anakin had turned at the same moment to see Luke tackle Obi-Wan to the floor, pinning him as Leia raised her lightsaber ready to strike. Anakin reached out with the Force, holding Leia's lightsaber back, but behind him, Plagueis grabbed his second saber and swung at Anakin, who also held it back with the Force. They were in a stalemate, but Plagueis could sense Anakin was gaining control, and if he did, he'd be able to save Obi-Wan and turn on him. There's only one way to win this battle, and it's to ensure Anakin is off balance and use his advantage to overpower him. Plagueis pulls back and focuses the Force on Luke and Leia. His connection to their minds was intimate, and through the Force, he decided to turn off the center on their brains that controlled their heart beating, essentially killing them. They both dropped to the floor unconscious as Anakin rushed over and grabbed them. He could sense life leaving them and grabbed onto them tightly. But behind him, Plagueis lunged, going for the kill whilst Anakin was distracted. But Kenobi was too fast, parried the strike and engaged Plagueis in battle. Anakin put his hands on Luke and Leia's heads, flowing his own Force energy into them. He could feel their life in them barely, and if he didn't do something, he would lose them. Plagueis thought Anakin would have no hope of saving them, that their fate was decided. However, little did Plagueis know, Anakin had learned a rare Force technique none of them had known other than himself. After Palpatine's defeat, when Anakin took over his office, he found the journal of his master Plagueis, and through this, learned the adapted ability to control and influence the midichlorians. He did this with Luke and Leia, connecting to their midichlorians and bringing them back to life, turned their brains back on, and Anakin successfully saved them from the brink of death. They remained unconscious, but Anakin knew they were alive. He turned to see Obi-Wan and Plagueis fighting as Anakin joined, no lightsaber. He simply sent Force Lightning at Plagueis, which hit him directly in the chest. He used the Force to crush all of his long bones until he activated Deadly Sight, burning Plagueis' flesh from the outside in, as Plagueis' screams echoed throughout the ship until silence, and he was successfully defeated. They had won. Over the following days, minor skirmishes played out across the galaxy until Plagueis' Sith were completely defeated. The galaxy was under control of the Skywalker Kenobi Empire once again, and they celebrated heavily around the galaxy, hosting parties and festivals on every system. The galaxy mostly supported the Empire, even though they were under dictatorship rule, because the galaxy was better even under the Empire. Obi-Wan and Anakin's family celebrated together in the countryside of Naboo, each bringing their own families, and had a massive party at the lake house. Towards the end of the night, in front of everyone, Luke proposed to Obi-Wan's daughter Kayla, who said yes and agreed to marry him. It was a night of celebration, and Anakin had learned an important lesson to once again not be arrogant in his ultimate power, that his family is still vulnerable without him. He, Padme, and Obi-Wan in the night on the balcony, looking up at the stars. The galaxy was theirs, they had taken it for themselves, but they had made it a better place. Hey guys, over at Fantasy Sabers, for the entire month of September, we are giving away a free Xenopixel plastic saber with every order. Xenopixel sabers offer movie accurate sound, smooth swing effects, and customizable coloring, making now the perfect time to grab a free saber for an unbeatable Star Wars experience. If you enjoyed this video, you must watch What If Leia time traveled to meet Anakin Skywalker, and What If Mace Windu was reborn with all of his memories. Please check out our membership program to be able to watch our videos early. Thanks for watching, and see you all next time.